They were targeted for not supporting then-candidate Donald Trump, and when they created Republican Women for Hillary, they even received death threats. Now Jennifer Lim and Meghan Milloy have a new organization, Republican Women for Progress. These policy lawyers hope to return to the core values they believe the Republican Party stands for and bring more Republican women into civic life. I sat down with them last week to discuss why they're sticking with a party they say deserted them. You spoke at the Democratic National Convention, and you said that your party had abandoned its bedrock values. What were those bedrock values?
You know, traditionally the Republican Party is very thoughtful on a lot of these policy issues and, you know, really tries to be inclusive and, you know, espouse liberty for all and equality. And, you know, we've gotten so far from that with, you know, during the campaign and in the current administration. And, you know, things that really unite the people in our group are a belief in limited government, you know, thoughtful dialogue on immigration policy, healthcare policy, you know, believing that our national trade agreements are important. And, you know, what we're seeing out of the Republican Party right now doesn't follow any of those values. And so while a lot of people feel like we left the Republican Party, they really left us.
You both voted for Hillary Clinton. Is there a place for conservative women in your group, or are you looking for only those Republican women who are down the middle or perhaps left-leaning?
There is a very big place for conservative women in our group, and we have some very conservative women that are on our board that I think are still very conservative and very, very faith-based conservative Republicans, but still kind of have this disconnect with the way Donald Trump is kind of moving the Republican Party. You know, I think we've both been pretty right-leaning Republican women all of our lives, and we kind of connect with those women that are like, whoa, you know, this is the party that I love and have worked for and have voted for so long, but this feels weird. And we welcome them with open arms. And, you know, I think that everyone's asked us, well, why don't you just go become Democrats? You voted for Hillary, you spoke at convention,
Why
just
not?
go be a Democrat. We aren't. You know, I think we are still very fiscally conservative. As Jenny said, most of the women on our board are big supporters of limited government. And it's kind of these ideas of individual liberties, and I think what the Republican Party really used to be, that we can really connect on with everyone.
Why are you still, Jennifer, in a party when it seems as though, at least currently, you seem to disagree with a good portion of what the party seems to represent?
Sure. You know, and it's funny, there are so many silent Republicans who are uncomfortable the same way we are. You know, right now you have the Freedom Caucus, you have the normal moderate Republicans, then you also have these new Trump Republicans. And, you know, they definitely don't want anything to do with us, which, you know, makes sense. But, you know, we're really hoping that, you know, through our work and through empowering Republican women, more Republican women and Republicans in general kind of speak up against, you know, these things that are happening in the Republican Party that aren't okay and don't really represent, you know, all the reasons we are Republicans in the first place. People always say, like, you know, I'll bring up the hot button issue when you talk about, you know, feminism and politics is, you know, are you guys pro-choice? Are you pro-life? And we're both. And I think that's great because, you know, Republican women are both pro-choice and pro-life. And the value I think our group can bring is really start the dialogue in that area and see, you know, where can we come together on some of these issues.
How is it then that you can be both pro-choice and pro-life? That seems like a contradiction in and of itself, Jennifer.
I think it does a disservice to women, especially if you're a group representing women, to feel like you have to choose one side or the other. You know, what you really should be doing is talking about the issues with people who don't agree with you and thinking about, you know, can we do better on, you know, contraception? Can we do better on educating people about these issues? You know, can we do better on childcare, you know, post-pregnancy? I think there are a lot of areas that the sides can come together on, and when you feel like as an organization you have to define yourself as one or the other, you really miss out on the opportunity to create real policy that could, you know, make a lasting effect on this in this space.
Is there anything, Meghan, that President Trump has done that you would support?
Yes. So I work in financial policy, banking regulations in my day job, and I think he has written some executive orders that will be extremely helpful to the small business community, especially community banks and some of these sort of weedy financial regulation issues. I have actually been pleasantly surprised with how he's handled some of the issues in Syria and kind of been forceful with this America First agenda. I think he's been a little bit better president than he was candidate.
And what about for you, Jennifer?
Well, and that's the hard part, right, for us is, there are things that are getting done that have always been on our agendas, especially as Republican women in the policy space. And it's really hard to juggle the fact that, we really didn't support this candidate, but, as president, there are a few things that are getting done that we would support. But at the end of the day, ideas matter, and the tenor of which you're conducting your presidency, and these other issues that you're doubling down on or haven't really addressed from the campaign, those are problems. And he's definitely, overall, while we are getting some agenda items checked off the list, which is why I think a lot of Republicans are fine being silent. We have to think about the future and the trickle-down effect of a lot of these, ideas that were brought up in the campaign and that are still happening in this administration.
So, Meghan, we have a one-page bullet point list of an outline of seemingly vague principles as part of President Trump's tax proposals. What did you think about those proposals?
Two thoughts. One, I think simplifying the tax code is a great idea. I think tax reform is a great idea. It hasn't been done in a very long time. But it doesn't seem like this administration has really spent a lot of time kind of delving down into the issues. They think that just breaking out the tax brackets from 7 to 3 is going to solve everyone's problems, and that's simplification. Technically, yes, it is simplification, but it kind of goes beyond that. Two, I think that this administration is having a real problem getting things done legislatively. You would think having a Republican president and Congress and Senate, we'd be able to just kind of ram everything through, and they haven't been able to. I think that shows some real problems. I think that's probably my biggest gripe with the administration is, well, not the biggest, one of my big gripes with the administration is what are they doing wrong that they can't really operate effectively through legislation because all the pieces are in place and they're still not able to.
What do you think the Republican Party will look like at the end of 4 years of President Trump?
Well, what we hope it will look like or what we think it will look like. Obviously everybody is already looking towards the 2018 elections, and I think that will be very telling in terms of whether the Republican Party continues to take on this new Trump-esque, national-esque, protectionist identity that was built out through the campaign, or whether they really go back to the more moderate Republican establishment that we were familiar with before. And I think a lot of that depends on how successful the Trump administration is. Obviously the first 100 days didn't really show us that they could really get down on their agenda. And so I think a lot of people will be really looking for some big successes from them shortly.
Yeah.
So,
what about you? What do you think, Meghan? What will the Republican Party look like in 2020?
That's the $1 million question, isn't it? This is an administration that has somehow managed to turn Georgia purple, and I think a lot will depend on the 2018 elections. But we've already seen the administration kind of do a 180 from some of their campaign stances, which is good in a lot of senses. And I think the more that they see, I think, a more moderate agenda doing well, especially in local races and in state races, I hope that the party will kind of come to the center on these issues, drop the things you can't fix, focus on the things that you can, And you know, if we have anything to do with it, I hope that we'll see some more women Republican candidates and have more Republican women for progress out there.